dead, you know this mission is impossible. Tell them we were dead, but me and Anthony are stoppable.
Here we go. So we are going to study Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. So if you've got that pulled up, here's what we're going to do. I really want to break this passage down. It's 10 verses. It's not a lot. But I think there's so much packed into this story. And it's a story you've all heard, right? Let's just be real. How many of us have heard the story of Zacchaeus? Show of hands. Now listen, how many of y'all know the song? Oh boy. Sing it, come on. And a wee little man was he. Y'all know it, don't lie. I actually don't know what's next, so if you do, keep going. But all the homeschooled kids said, yeah! That was our music lesson this week. Stop, Phil. Stop it. If you go to Canada, you don't even get music, so. Stop it, Phil. Susquehannock's not even real, so it's fine. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Education's important. So we're going to study through this. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up, and we're going to start with verses 1 through 5. So they're going to be up on the screen, okay? So in your own, books, electronic books, up on the top, whatever you got. We're going to read it literally verse by verse, and we're going to break down what Jesus did in this situation, WDJD. So check this out. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Hold up. Listen, there's so much to pull out of the Bible. He just said so many crazy things. That was 6 whole words. Did y'all catch it? Exactly. I got to stop already. I really believe that every word is jam-packed. So let's give you some context. It says this. It says that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. So it talks about this casual way that Jesus was making through Jericho. All right, so if we study contextually, we know that Jesus had just left a situation where he had healed a blind man. If you go a chapter ahead, he healed a blind man, right? And it talks about how this blind man was a beggar and was on the side of the road, and that he called out numerous times, and that people shamed him for doing that, right? A lot of people viewed him as the low of the low. He was the beggar at the opening to the city. If you reference Mark 10, it's crazy, the Gospels, one of the reasons we know these joints are for real, is that they were all written at different places by different people, and they say the same thing. It's so crazy. In Mark 10, we know that this guy's name is Bartimaeus. So Jesus heals this blind man named Bartimaeus, and in Mark 10 specifically, it says that there was a large crowd that watched this miracle happen. So I want to set the scene. I don't think that him passing through Jericho is something that we should just pass by, but it's more than that. As he's passing through, literally, we don't know, maybe hours or no more than a couple days before, he had just done this really crazy miracle in front of an entire crowd, right? So you can imagine, as Jesus is passing through, that there is a buzz about this man. There is an excitement about this man. He's got a crowd following him, as he often did post-miracles. And this is one of those instances. So it says that he entered Jericho and was passing through. Verse 2, a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. I find it really interesting that Luke, who wrote this, it's the book of Luke, names Zacchaeus. So often we read stories in the Bible, and people remain nameless. Right? I mean, even in the paragraph or chapter before this, when it talks about the beggar, it actually doesn't make a point to name Bartimaeus in the book of Luke. But he does name Zacchaeus, and he also gives us a little information. So if you look, it says that he was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. Now, some context that's going to make this hopefully interesting for you is that the way the Roman government functioned back in the day, and just to be real, I'm not a history nerd, so if you are, you're welcome, because I don't enjoy studying this stuff. I did it for y'all, okay? The way that the Roman government worked back in the day is they wanted to control people by taking their money, collecting taxes. And the way they would go about that is they would go into the different communities and cultures, and they would enlist people from those communities and cultures to do their dirty work. So when it says that he was a chief tax collector, Zacchaeus was, there's a lot of things we actually know then about him. One, he was Jewish. He was from Jericho. We know that he was a Jew by heritage. Jewish people had a very proud heritage at the time. But we also know that he had then enlisted with the Roman government to collect taxes from his own people. Therefore, Zacchaeus was a traitor. Zacchaeus was a very hated man. Zacchaeus had basically said to his own blood, his own people, his own family, his own background, I'm not for y'all, I'm with the money. I'm with what's going to benefit me. You know what I mean? So we got to take the context of this and realize who is saying that this man was. He was taking it from his own people. So he was a traitor. And on top of that, look what it calls him. It calls him the chief tax collector. What does that mean? That means that your boy, wee little man was he, was literally the ringleader of the traitors. That's who we're talking about right now. So notice the range of people Jesus interacts with. This is all about what Jesus did. That's what we're talking about the next 4 weeks, what he did. He just healed the lowest of the low, a blind beggar who people often passed by and viewed as a burden. And now the very next paragraph, he's encountering the ringleader of all traders, and it finishes in saying he was wealthy. So on top of that, this man was rich off of his own blood. He was rich off of his own family. That's like you going to your mama, stealing her whole purse, taking that credit card, buying an apartment, moving out to LA, and funding your groceries. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's who he was. He was the ringleader of those people, man. He was a traitor. He was very, very hated in this community of Jericho. And he was rich, stuffing his pockets via the robbing of his own heritage. This man was a jacked up dude. So let's keep going. Verse number 3, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but he was short, so he couldn't see over the crowd. And verse 4 says, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. I find it so interesting that Zacchaeus, who he was, wanted to see who Jesus was. Zacchaeus had every reason to not give a rat's butt about who Jesus was. He had everything going for him. He was the richest in his community. In fact, he was hated by that community, so he was ostracized in a lot of ways. Anybody relate to being the outcast? That's who this guy was. But he wanted to know who Jesus was. And then look what it says. But. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but. And I think we could stop even right there. And I want to ask you guys, what's your but? With one T. What are the reasons that you have a but in your sentence? Meaning you say, well, I want to see who Jesus is. A lot of you are here, and guess what? That means that you are at least curious. You're a minimal curious. But what is the thing getting in front of you from seeing who he was? In this instance, he was literally short. But what's the excuse that's making you not grow closer to God? Like what Zacchaeus had right here. And then he keeps going. It calls him short. Why is this important? You know what's so interesting? The Bible almost never gives physical attributes of people. Almost never. It only happens a couple times in the entire Bible that they describe what someone looked like physically. For the most part, it was irrelevant to what they were doing. But in this man's instance, they call him a chief tax collector, which we just described what that really meant. And then it makes a literal, like an insert in the sentence with commas to let us know that he is short. There have now been given 2 reasons to us why Zacchaeus was deficient. How many of us often feel deficient? How many of us go through our life, and whether it's a physical attribute that we don't like, or it's what we've done, the decisions we've made, or the people that we're around, the communities that we're in, we actually feel deficient. And they might not be for God, but maybe it's for the people around you. Maybe it's for what your family standards are. Maybe it's for the friend group that you're trying to be a part in, for that girl or guy you really want, but you're not enough for them for whatever reason, and we feel deficient. We've been given 2 reasons now why Zacchaeus was deficient to be pursuing Jesus. And that's important. But if you look at what he says, it says that he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. He knew where he had to be just to get a glimpse of that Jesus. So we're big on like getting a visual and a context of the story. Just think about what's going on here. This is the man wearing like red and purple golden robed things, right? It's probably down to the floor because that's what those dudes wore. He's probably got change in his pockets for days, you know what I'm saying? It's loud and clinky because he steals money from his own people. He's probably got the headdress. Everybody's looking at him funny while he's walking by. You know what I'm saying? And imagine this man, get the visual, like scurrying down the road. You know, he's like hiked up his dress or whatever they wore. He's hiked it up, you know what I'm saying? It's clinking. He's like clink, 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 clink. And then the man starts climbing a tree. So imagine what that looks like. He hikes the back of the dress up onto his neck, and he's like, okay, here we go. You know what I'm saying? Like, it looked awkward. So this deficient man, this man that a lot of people looked at as deficient, is also looking like an idiot right now, if we're being real. There's no way this was graceful, okay? It isn't. We can use context to know this wasn't graceful. Just imagine what it looked like. He worked to get a glimpse. And my question then, even with that, is how hard do you work to see Jesus? Are you hiking up the robes in your life and the clinking and looking ridiculous and shuffling and climbing sycamore fig trees? How hard do you work to see Jesus? And the second question with that is, are you putting yourselves in positions where you can see Jesus? He climbed up on a tree because he was short. He knew his problem, so he found the solution and put him in a position to see Jesus. What are you doing to put yourself in position to see Jesus? I want you to think, there's a reason these aren't on the slides. I want you just to be thinking about these things, because at the end of this, we want to give you guys an opportunity to potentially respond to how you are or aren't pursuing, or the ways and positions you are or aren't putting yourself into. But Zacchaeus was climbing up this tree, all his deficiencies, and nonetheless, and then here's what we see in verse 5. This is incredible. Look at this. This is so important. Read this. When Jesus reached the spot, that's worded intentionally. We'll get there. He looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house. He looked up. Can I tell you how powerful of a phrase that is? That God in the flesh looked up at this deficient man on a sycamore fig tree branch. That God chose to look up, and he got to the spot. Think about this. Like, he calls Zacchaeus by name, and where in this chapter does it say that Jesus was told his name? Luke names his name, right, and gives context. He's talking about who Zacchaeus was. And then when we get to Jesus, it says that Jesus called him by name. Jesus was just passing through. We just read that, right? He wasn't staying there. What this is a beautiful picture of the omniscience of God, the all-knowingness of who Jesus was. He knew exactly who Zacchaeus was. He looked up when he got to the spot. Come on. God preordained that spot. It's called the spot. It's called the spot. Can I tell you God creates spots for you? Can I tell you God's got spots for you? But the beautiful thing about this spot is that Zacchaeus was where he needed to be. And Jesus looks up, calls him by name, and amidst all of his deficiencies, all the reasons he should not have been the person that Jesus looked up to, nowhere does it say that he wasn't. In fact, he was. And here's what you need to know about that. And this applies to you, is that Jesus, in the same way he sought Zacchaeus, Jesus seeks you. He goes to the spot. He knows you. He calls you by name. And he loves you. And the beautiful thing is it's despite you. This is point number one, that he seeks you, he knows you, and he loves you despite you. What does despite you mean? Zacchaeus had every reason to not be the guy that Jesus picked. As he's passing through, Jesus had every reason to pick anybody else. The people who needed healing, the people who were poor, the people who had lived outstanding lives. But who does he stop and look up to? The clinky, purple, golden-robed man up in the sycamore fig tree who was deficient and embarrassed and an outcast. That's who he chose. And I think we need to know in the same exact way, Jesus, what does he do? He seeks us, he knows us, and he loves us. Because Zacchaeus had all the reasons. And the thing about Jesus is that Jesus is so countercultural, because what would have the world, what would have your friends, what would have our people in our circles and even us, what would have we done? Would we turn to the traitor? Would we stop for the traitor? The guy who had stolen all of our money, all of our heritage, the guy who was plundering our houses and leaving us poor, who had betrayed us, would we stop with him? No. In fact, the culture would say that's the person you leave alone. Go to the person who's done the good things. Go to the person who deserves it. But Jesus is so countercultural. So countercultural. He takes things and he flips them on his head, because that's what he does, because he's not like us. In fact, his ways are so much higher than ours. As far as the heaven is from the earth, it says that his ways are further than ours. But what we need to see is that some of you feel the exact same way as Zacchaeus. Some of you feel deficient. Maybe it's physically. Maybe it's the spiritual side of it. Maybe it's what you've done, your decisions, or the things that you think, and you feel deficient. And what you need to know is that he loves you because he's so countercultural. He seeks you because he's so countercultural. He knows you because he created you, and he loves you because of who he is. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done or any of the deficiencies you think you've had. Check out some of these verses. 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Matthew 11:28, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Isaiah 40:29, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. And those verses keep going. Do you know that he seeks you and knows you and loves you? Because he does. Turn to your neighbor and say, he seeks me, he knows me, and he loves me. Yeah, he does. Let's keep going. So we're going to go into verses 6 through 8. We're going to keep breaking this down. Like, listen, we're only halfway through this, family. Do y'all see how packed the Bible is? I've read a lot of self-help books, and none of them are this packed. You know what I'm saying? I've never read a self-help book, but I've read books. I like C.S. Lewis. Okay. Shh. Stop. Verses 6 through 8. Let's keep going. So he came down at once. So Jesus just called him by name and said, I must come to your house. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. That's the countercultural thing. Even the culture at the time didn't get it. They didn't understand it. They didn't like it. But Zacchaeus stood up, and when he heard the muttering, and he knew that, hey, people don't think that I should be deserving of this. This is what he says. But Zacchaeus stood up. He's short, so it probably didn't mean much. And said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Listen, 4 times is super critical. Like, context in the Bible is huge because this is going to teach you a lot of things. There was a Jewish law at the time, because this man was Jewish. We just talked about that. There was a Jewish law at the time that if you cheated somebody out of something, you were then to return that and pay them 4 times more back. This man just proved, hey, I really am a Jew, okay? I've been screwing up, and I've been stealing all my people's money. So because of how bad I've been, and this encounter, I'm going to follow my ancestors' law, and I'm going to pay 4 back. He offers that. I'm going to pay back 4 times as much. That's super, super crucial. This man, Zacchaeus, went from a greedy, selfish chief of traders to offering half of his wealth to the poor and repaying any cheating 4-fold in line with the laws of the same people he was cheating. That's massive. We can't overlook that sentence as if it's just like, oh, cool, he's going to pay it back. There's so much to imply there. And what it reminds me is, how many of you know the story of the young ruler? It's in Luke 18. The young ruler who said, how can I inherit the kingdom of heaven? Any of you know that story? There's 3. I love it. No, I know some of you do, but you didn't want to say anything. Think about that story. What does the young ruler ask? He says, well, what do I need to do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? And notice this is 1 chapter before, so it's relevant. And Jesus says to him what? Sell all of your possessions, give to the poor, and then follow me. That's what he says. And what does the young ruler do? He turns and walks away, and specifically sad. Why? Because in this story, the young ruler gripped to things of this world so tightly that he could never be gripped by Christ. But I look at this story of Zacchaeus, who was never asked any of these things, but on his own will offered to give up half of his wealth because of this encounter and to pay back 4 times as much. Why did he do that? Because he was so gripped by Christ that he held loosely to the things of this world. What do you hold on to? The young ruler couldn't grip Christ because he held too tightly to the things around him, the things he loved, the things that felt good, the things that he felt like he was achieving. Felt like he couldn't give them up, and because of that, he couldn't be gripped by Christ. But Zacchaeus was so gripped by Christ that his hands were open with everything else. Where are you? Where are you in that? And that was what Zacchaeus had went through. And what happened? Why? Why was he so different than the young ruler? Why was he so loose with the things of this world, even though he had much? Because he had encountered Christ. An encounter with Jesus changes everything. This is point 2. An encounter with Jesus changes absolutely everything. This man didn't even need to be asked to give up the wealth because he was gripped by something else, something that mattered, something that made a difference. And I just wonder if we are today. And if you aren't sure, if maybe you think you hold on to things too tightly and that's what's causing you to not be able to grip onto Christ, and you want more of that gripping of Christ so you can let go of everything else, we're going to get there a little bit later, and I hope that you step up to the call. So the man who betrayed his nation and cared only for his wealth, within a moment with Jesus, within a moment, offers to give it all away. Here's a surefire way to know that you've encountered Jesus. You won't need to be asked to change. You will want to change. A surefire way to know if you've experienced this dude named Jesus is no one's going to have to ask you. There are going to be times you're going to have to learn, that you're going to need mentoring, that you're going to need guided, but you're going to want to do it because you are gripped so tightly by something else. My own life and so many of the leaders and students who are passionately following Jesus in this room are such good examples of that. I look to my college time. I give you my testimony week 1. I held so tightly to things, and they drove me to be the lowest that I had ever been because my hands weren't open to be able to receive Jesus. But here's the thing, is that nothing truly changes without an encounter with God. Nothing. So if you're wondering, well, how? How do I change some things? How do I pursue this? That sounds good. Like I want to not need my money and just be free with it and it not burden me, or whatever that may be, your relationships or the pride that you have or the sin that you hold on to. I want to be loose with that. But it won't happen until we encounter Jesus. And some of you want that. You want to hear him. You want to feel him, but you don't ask him. You don't ask him. We want this Jesus thing. Maybe some of you have showed up to this for years, and it's just at no point has it clicked, or maybe it has at times, and it's an on and off type of deal. But I would be willing to bet that the big missing consistency is you just don't simply ask, man. Daddy wants to hear from you. He's waiting. He wants to hear you ask for these things, for this encounter. And if you want it, here's the other thing, is you have to get up on the branch and be in position to receive it. So often, we don't put ourselves in position to receive the looking up of God. Had Jesus gotten to the spot and looked up and Zacchaeus hadn't climbed the tree, none of this happens. But Zacchaeus desired it, and he started asking the questions. He was like, well, what if I hike up this robe and it starts clinking and I embarrass myself? Some of y'all are going to need to embarrass yourself to experience Jesus. I look like a fool every Wednesday up here for Jesus. Some of y'all are going to need to find those uncomfortable places, to climb your metaphorical trees, to be in position to encounter it. But an encounter with Jesus changes everything. Could we be people who just simply ask for the encounter? And then the final 2 verses, this is 25 minutes on 8 verses. Like, the Bible's crazy. Check this out. Verses 9 and 10. Jesus said to him, so after all this has happened and he offers away the wealth, Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. And the interesting thing is that he's not talking about lineage. He's saying you've now been saved, because son of Abraham implied salvation in the line of Abraham. He says, you too now are a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So why do we read this story in the first week of WDJD? Why, when we want to learn what did Jesus do, did we pick this first? And why did he do all these crazy things that he did? The answer is to save the lost. And here's the absolute truth. Without Jesus, we are all lost. Something that I think sometimes we don't grasp, and it's the cause of us not getting up on the branch. Hear this. You will never want to go get up on whatever your branch is if you don't actually believe that you're lost without Jesus. If you think you have it all figured out, you're never going to get up on the branch. And the encounter is going to seem elusive to you, and you're going to wonder why. But without him, we are all lost. And the thing about this story is it shows that all people, no matter race, gender, heritage, economic class, rich or poor, good or bad, are all lost. All of them. There's back-to-back stories of the healing of Bartimaeus, the blind beggar who had absolutely nothing going for him. The very next story is a rich trader who had everything going for him. It's not about who you are or where you've been or what you've done or any of those things. Can I tell you that our culture would look at someone like Zacchaeus and say he's got it figured out? Why? Why would we look at a guy like Zacchaeus, let's just put it in context, rich, doesn't treat people well around him, uses his wealth for personal gain, not tight with his family, doesn't value family or community or culture. Can I tell you that sounds a lot like a lot of the celebrities we follow? We glorify the same people that this culture hated, right? And it's because we value all the wrong things. But Jesus here shows that even the richest, most powerful man is completely lost outside of Christ. Anyone who doesn't know Jesus doesn't have purpose, doesn't know their true value. Listen, things come and go. People come and go. Feelings come and go. Can I tell you, you cannot find real purpose in things that are temporary. You can't. Because that makes whatever your purpose was temporary. If your purpose is in a relationship, that boo you think is it, they could leave tomorrow, my friends. It happens often. How can you have purpose in something that can leave you? If your purpose is in the things that you acquire and the things that you're trying to grow in your life, guess what? Your house could get robbed tomorrow and it's all gone. Happens to people. Your house could burn down. I pray against that in Jesus' name. But it could. You could lose that person in an instant if your purpose is not rooted in something eternal and that truly gives value and purpose. You won't understand that you're lost, and you'll put purpose in things that can't give it to you. If it can leave you, it can't give you true purpose. And if you don't have true purpose and direction, you're lost. And that's actually hopefully an encouragement, because the moment we realize we're lost, we can then be found. People who don't think they're lost can't be found. But when we realize we're lost, we turn into Zacchaeus and we climb up on that branch and we say, I got to see what this is all about, because he's been doing some crazy stuff and he's really about this business and I need to know who this dude is. And because of that desperation Zacchaeus had, he got it. He had the encounter. Do you know why it is that so often stories of coming to Christ go like this? Well, I thought I had it all together and I was pursuing a lot of stuff and then it just wasn't working out for me and I kind of hit rock bottom. You know, that sounds super familiar, doesn't it? Or like you got people who come to you if you've been doing this thing and they're just in the dumps and you ask why and it's like, well, because I've been with this girl. Is she a Christian and like support you? No, but she's like looks good on Instagram. Okay. And I played this sport that like my parents didn't really want me to because they didn't think it'd be a good investment in time. And like my friend group, they're all really, really bad. They vape and smoke and they drink and they are really bad influences, but like, you know, it's not that bad. You know what I'm saying? And then they come to you and they're like, man, life sucks. It's a super familiar story, and it will continue to be a super familiar story. It was my story. But why? Because often God's going to let you hit rock bottom so that you realize he is your rock. You can't know that you need finding and saving until you know that you're lost. And when you hit that lowest time where we feel like God's not there, our only option at that low of a level is to look up. And we realize then that we need this encounter and that we are lost and these things aren't getting it for us. So outside of knowing him, we are all lost. And now we know via the story of Zacchaeus that he came to seek and save the lost, a.k.a. you. You are Zacchaeus. As you read the story, you can now fill your name in there and whatever your deficiencies are. Maybe it's not short and a chief traitor, the ringleader of traitors, but you have them. You have those insecurities. You have those doubts. Are you willing to hike the robe up, clink over to that tree, all embarrassed and awkward, climb up that so you can be in position for Jesus to seek you and call you by name because he knows you and loves you? Do you know he came for you? So my question is, where are you today? We're going to close up here in a second. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to really change, hopefully, something tonight. But where are you today? Because Zacchaeus was curious. He was curious. And some of you are curious. Some of you want to know what's over the crowd. Why is this room full every week? Why is this Jesus thing just constantly showing up? Why is this guy not gone away yet thousands of years later? You're curious. You're curious about Jesus and faith, and curious is good, but can I tell you that Jesus wants committed? He wants you up on that branch so that he can call you back down. Some of you are curious, but he wants committed. And here's what we're going to do with that idea. Embrace where you are right now. Where are you in this story? I think this is how we need to go about this, and I think I really want you guys to embrace this as I feel as if God was talking to some of you during this. I want everyone to bow their heads right now. I want you to be with you and Jesus and this story of Zacchaeus and what he meant through it, because he came to seek and he knows you and he loves you. What I want to do is I want you to realize this, is heads down. that Jesus doesn't want you to stay in the tree. He wants to come to your house. He doesn't want you to stay in the tree, and some of you are in the tree in a lot of different ways. He wants to come to your house. He loves you so deeply, and he wants in on everything. Some of you have stayed up in the tree for certain things, people, or whatever it may be. Some of you have never gotten down from the tree to really accept this thing, this salvation, this Jesus and what he offers us, eternal life. Some of you haven't gotten down from the tree. There's secret sin for some of you. And you're still up in the tree, and Jesus is like, I want in, let me in, but you won't. You stay up in the tree. There's relationships and problems and pain that you have, and you're still up in the tree. So here's what we're going to do. This is a family affair. We really believe that we're family here. So as the band begins to kind of play, I want to offer the opportunity for us to get out of the tree today. I want an opportunity for us to come together as a family and embrace the things that God wants for us in our lives. I'm even going to get off the stage for this. I'm going to come down here because this is a family affair. I'm going to start listing out things that might be our tree, and if they are you, or if you feel as if you might be in a tree in some way, shape, or form, I simply want you to get up and just come up and be here with the family. And we're going to pray. As a group, we're going to pray against the ways that we're still in the tree and that God would help us get down from them. So I'm just going to start listing some things. And if you've already felt called, just come up. Just come up and be with the family. But if you're in the tree and there is sin in your life that you know and you know and you know that God doesn't want there for you, but you've been sitting on the branch and Jesus is looking up at you and saying, come down, I must be in your house, but you won't get rid of it. I want you to come up. Don't worry about what other people think.